Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the session this evening, we're going to pick up where we left off. We're talking about Hajj and associated rulings. Tonight we're looking at the mawaqit. We're going to look at Ihram and different types of rites and rituals of Hajj and some associated rulings pertaining to what you cannot do while you are making Hajj or Umrah. So to get right into it, Babul Mawaqit, this is the chapter pertaining to the Miqat, or the plural of that, Mawaqit. So Miqat, Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, Miqatu Ahl al-Madina Dhul Hulayfa. Beginning with the Miqat of Medina, the people of Medina, the residents, is called Dhul Hulayfa. So Dhul Hulayfa, this is the furthest Miqat from Mecca. It's an approximate distance of 10 days. Today it's a couple of hours by car or by bus. And a very popular Miqat to stop at, especially if your travel agent or you, the travel agent yourself, has booked a visit to Medina first, and then will be making their way to make Umrah or Hajj from there. So this is where you would stop, and you would begin your journey or your Ihram from that point. So we have to understand the nature of Miqat. The Miqat is a limit. Linguistically, it means a limit. And then technically, like the religious meaning or definition of it, means a place of worship as well as its time. Just so we can understand what the word is after here. So again, we have Dhul Hulayfa, the first Miqat mentioned here, the furthest away. The next he says, وَأَهْلُ الْمِصْرِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ الْجُحْفَةِ, which basically means here the Miqat for Egypt. This also includes the people of Sham. And Al-Maghrib is called Juhfa. Here we have Al-Juhfa. He says Qurba Rabigh, which is close to Rabigh. This is like, very popular as well, highlighting the people that would make their way from those regions. They would stop there. He goes on and he says, وَأَهْلِ الْيَمَنِ يَلَمْلَمْ وَأَهْلِ نَجْدٍ قرن وأهل المشرق ذات عرق وهي لأهلها ولمن مر عليها من غيرهم ولا يحل لمكلف تجاوز الميقات بلا إحرام إذا أراد مكة أو نسكا أو كان فرضه. So basically here, going on to talk about the other mawaqit, you have for the people of Yemen, it's a place called Yalamlam. This is like 2 nights away. The Miqat for the people of Najd and for Ta'if is known as Qarn. It's also called Qarn al-Manazil or Qarn al-Tha'alib, which is like a day and a night away, so we're getting closer to Mecca. And for the people of the east, you have Al-Irq. And this is for the people of Al-Iraq as well as Khurasan. So it's called Irq. It's also known as Dhat Irqin. And this is a place named after a small mountain. The mountain is called Irq. And this is just also a short distance from Mecca as well. So the Miqat here, as the Imam, he says, these different places that you begin your rites and rituals of either Hajj or Umrah, he says, وَهِيَ لِأَهْلِهَا وَلِمَنْ مَرَّ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ غَيْرِهِمْ. Basically, these Miqats are for the respective mentioned peoples of that region, as well as everyone else who passes by. So regardless of where you're coming from around the globe, you're going to pass by a Miqat. And when you do pass by that Miqat, then you're going to begin your rites and rituals with Ihram. So this is when we're looking at the Mawaqit from the outside, and you're going to pass by them. There are people that live within the borders of the Mawaqit or the Miqats. So if you live within inside of that border, you would make ihram from your home. both for Hajj as well as for Umrah. He goes on and he says, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لِمُكَلَّفٍ, and it's not permitted for someone who is of legal capacity, and we're talking specifically about a free Muslim who wishes to enter Mecca, perform the rites, or discharge their obligation, meaning the obligation of either Hajj and Umrah as well. And this is the Hajj of Islam, or the Umrah of Islam is what it's called, and we talked about that previously. It is not permitted for them to pass the Miqat without having made Ihram, except in the case of permissible warfare. These are exceptions to that, out of fear, or a need which is repetitive in nature, such as to retrieve firewood or something of that nature. If you're going in and out of this border area, then you can't enter it without having made the intention, having made Ihram, in order to handle these types of needs. If one were to pass for any other reason, they would have to return in order to make Ihram, so long as they do not fear missing the Hajj, or for their personal safety. In that case, they could continue going forward. If they were to make Ihram from their current location, meaning inside of the Miqat, there would be a blood sacrifice that would be offered as compensation for breaking that requirement. And that means even if they returned to the Miqat after making Ihram. So basically, if you were to make Ihram inside of the Miqat, you did not stop there, but you went forward, you made Ihram, and then you're like, nope, I don't want to have to pay that blood sacrifice, I'm going to go back to the Miqat. You've already entered into Ihram, so now it's already due regardless if you get back there and then you carry on forward afterwards. A couple of details here mentioned by Ibn Qa'id in his explanation, Al-Hidayah or Hidayat al-Raghib, which we've been using extensively. He says that if a prepubescent youth entered and then attained puberty, they would make Ihram from where they were. He goes on and he says here, وَمَنْ حَجَّ مِن مَكَّةِ, whoever makes Hajj from Mecca, أَوْ أَحْرَمَ مِنْهَا, so whoever wants to make Hajj from Mecca is to make Ihram while they are in Mecca, or they want to make Ihram while they are in Mecca. So someone that happened to have been in Mecca, they're not the resident there, they went without the intention to make Hajj or Umrah, and now they happen to be there for whatever reason, they would make Ihram from that location, wherever they happen to be. It's also permitted, he says, to make Ihram from non-sacred land, and this can be done without a blood sacrifice. And he goes on and he says, وَعُمْرَتُهُ مِنَ الْحِلِّ, and whoever makes Umrah while in Mecca is obliged to make Ihram. So if you're going to make Umrah while you're in Mecca, you have to go outside of the Haram area. So basically, if you think about it, there's like two borders. The border of the Miqat, which is like the greater border, and then there's the border of the Haram, which is like, we could say, the lesser border. So you have to consider those different borders based on what it is that you're going to do and where it is that you are and where you're going to begin the rites and rituals. He says, though it is valid if made inside of Mecca, while there would warrant a blood sacrifice for doing so. So that talks about the place a little bit. And then he mentions some details about the time. He says, وَأَشْهُرُ الْحَجِّ, and these are the months of Hajj. They are Shawwal. You know, everyone is familiar with, hopefully familiar with these months. You have the month of Shawwal. You have Dhul Qa'dah, which is the month that follows after. And then you have وَعَشْرٌ مِنْ ذِي الْحِجَّةِ, the 10 of Dhul Hijjah. And included in those 10 are Yawm al-Nahar, which is Yawm al-Hajj al-Akbar. It's considered the greatest day of Hajj. So these are the months of Hajj. And that's important to keep that in mind when it comes to the type of Hajj that you're going to make, which we're going to talk about shortly. The Imam Bahuti says, وَيُكْرَهُ إِحْرَامٌ قَبْلَ مِقَاتٍ, that it is disliked. It says, وَيُكْرَهُ إِحْرَامٌ قَبْلَ مِقَاتٍ وَبِحَجٍ قَبْلَ أَشْهُرِهِ وَيَنْعَقِدْ. So he says, though it's convened, meaning it does count, making ihram before the miqat, it's disliked. And before its months for Hajj is disliked. It's disliked, but it is still valid. So when you're making Hajj or Umrah, you have to consider these things, the place, and you have to consider the time, depending on which one you're going to perform. He moves on from here to talk about Ihram. So that was a brief coverage of the mawaqit. The next section, which has a little bit more detail to it, is al-Ihram. This is the next section after Miqat. Obviously, that's what you're interested in now. It's kind of a logical progression. You're going to go to this location, and you're going to prepare yourself to make the rites and rituals, perform the rites and rituals of Hajj or Umrah. And to do that, you have to enter into a state of al-Ihram. So al-Ihram linguistically means to enter into a state of religious consecration. And basically what that means, this religious consecration, is when you have prohibited something for yourself which was initially permissible before that particular state. So there are things that you can do normally, they're permissible for you, and once you make ihram or enter into this state, they are now impermissible for you. Like, as an example, marriage. While you're in ihram, you cannot marry, you cannot apply perfume, and the various other things that we're going to get to shortly here. So that's what we understand from the linguistic meaning of al-Ihram. The technical meaning of Ihram is, as he says, the intention for a specific rite. Niyatun nusuk. And the nusuk, or what we've discussed before, are the various types of rites and rituals, whether that's Umrah or one of the three various types of pilgrimages that one might make. And in the event that that's what one person wants to do, there are, of course, some recommendations that should be made, or that should be completed. He mentions that next. He says, Sunna li muridihi ghuslun aw tayammumun li udhrin wa tanaddufun wa tatayyubun. So these are a couple of things to keep in mind here. He says here, performing ghusl is recommended even for a woman experiencing her menstrual cycle or postpartum bleeding. And so we understand, as we've talked about in the chapter of purification, that women would typically perform the ghusl once that was concluded. But in the case that they were still experiencing that, a bleeding, they would perform the ghusl due to the rites and rituals that they're about to perform. And this is based on the Prophet ﷺ commanding Asma bint Umays, as she was experiencing postpartum bleeding. He commanded her to perform ghusl. You find this in Sahih Muslim. He also, ﷺ, ordered Aisha to perform ghusl in preparation for Hajj when she was experiencing her menstrual cycle. And this you can find in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim as well. So that is the ghusl. And then there is, as he says, O tayammumun, you can perform tayammum in the event that you can't perform ghusl. And we've talked about the nature of tayammum and when it's used, and here there's a reason for that. It's not like I can do one or the other, it's I can do this in the absence of that. Meaning if I can't perform ghusl due to a lack of water or an inability to use water, like I could have some type of illness or physical ailment which would prevent me from using the water, then in that case I would purify myself as a recommendation with tayammum. And that would suffice that particular act. The next thing he says, وَتَنَظُّفٌ, and this is to basically clean up. It's not like a ritual act of purification like wudu or ghusl, but it's just cleaning yourself. And that's done by way of, trimming your hair or removing hair from the body. As we know, Muslims, we have a particular level of hygiene in which there are areas of the body in which we remove hair. All right, so this would be the time to do that. Before you're going to make ihram, you're going to take care of these acts, these various different things of hygiene. To clip the fingernails would be another thing that you could do to kind of clean up, to wash up and prepare yourself. To remove any foul odors from the body, so that you do not need to do so while you're in ihram. Because when we enter into ihram, these are some of the things that we're not permitted to do, like removing hair from the body. Even one single hair, if it's intentionally removed, it warrants a penalty, or a fingernail, or applying perfumes, those types of things, which we'll discuss shortly. So you may have missed these things and later like, look, I got a situation, I want to take care of this, and now you're stuck. So those are recommended acts in order to avoid feeling the need to do so later while you're in ihram. Again, you wouldn't be able to do so during that time. Another recommended act, he says, وَسُنَّ لَهُ أَيْضًا تَطَيُّبٌ, which is to apply perfume. This is also recommended, and it's recommended to apply it to the body. You would apply like misk, or you would use bakhur, or he mentions ma' wurd, which is like rose water, or those types of perfumes. They're like fragrances that are considered طيب, okay? And there's a distinction between a fragrance which is considered طيب and then a fragrance that is not. It's like fruit smells and stuff. And that's going to be important when we get to the point when we talk about somebody that applies perfumes or scents to their body after having made ihram. So this is before ihram. You're permitted and recommended to apply طيب, or what we would call perfume. Again, there's a specific type that we're talking about here. And this is based on a narration from Aisha radiallahu anha, when she said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would, or she would, kuntu uṭayyibu Rasulullahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam li ihrami qabla an yuhrim. She said that I would apply perfume or طيب to the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam for the purposes of ihram before he entered into ihram. And then she said, وَلِحِلِّهِ قَبْلَ أَن يَطُوفَ بِالْبَيْتِ, and then when he was out of ihram, before he would make tawaf around the Kaaba. She said, it was as if I was looking at the shimmer of misk on the part of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam while he was in ihram. And this narration is muttafaqun alayh. So you can certainly find it in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Another thing to note about the application of طيب, as Ibn Qa'id mentions here, he says, وَكُرِهَ أَنْ يَتَطَيَّبَ فِي ثَوْبِ, is disliked to apply طيب to your clothing. It's disliked. And there's some reasoning for that. He mentions here, وَلَهُ إِسْتِدَامَةُ لُبْسِهِ. He says they can, or the muhrim can, wear that. It has to be worn all of the time, that clothing, so long as it is not removed. Like, so for example, you have the rida, which is the top upper portion of the two, rida and the izar, right? It's the upper garment that you would wear. So if you were to apply some type of طيب to that, or you washed it in detergent which was like misk, that's not a fragrance they sell over here, but if you were in the Muslim lands, you might find that the detergent companies are making tied with that fragrance, because that's the popular fragrance, right? It might not be spring forest or fresh linen, but it's going to be misk or bukhur or those types of things. They consider the target market, obviously, in order to sell the detergent. So if you were to You wash your garment with those types of fragrances or apply it directly to that before the ihram, then you could put it on, you could wear it as long as you didn't take it off. If you take it off and wear it again, then that means you've applied the طيب. So if you take off that fragranted garment, the طيب has to be washed from it in order for you to wear it again. If you put it back on intentionally, then, as I said, you have now applied some type of perfume. Or if you have it on your body, you know, you put some طيب on there, and sometimes when you put it on, so you could put it on and you could apply it in a manner that it's now just the fragrance that's left, the smell, right? Maybe you've just put a little bit, you've rubbed it in, and now there's nothing left but the fragrance. But sometimes you may put certain types of طيب in different types of forms. Maybe it's a very thick liquid, or it's a cream of some type, and you put it on there, and there's still some of the matter, if you will, of that perfume that's there. So you have some remnant of the actual substance on you. And so here, if you were to intentionally come in contact with that substance that's there, or you were to try and rub it off in some way or move it from its location, then this is done intentionally, then this would be considered sinful, and there would be a fidya involved here. Because now you've intentionally come in contact with this طيب when you're not permitted to do so while in the state of ihram. This is different from unintentional, where it kind of, like, for example, he mentions here, you're sweating, and the sweat moves that stuff around. It just starts to drip on the body. If you have it in your head or in your hair, and you start sweating and it starts to drip down your face or whatever part of the body, this is very different than if you were to do it intentionally on your own. So there would be no sin and no fidya in this case if it's done unintentionally without control. Another important recommendation here, he says, وَسُنَّ لَهُ أَيْضًا تَجَرُّدٌ عَنْ مَخِيطٍ. So it's removing all fitted clothing. And this is a recommendation for males. Females, when it comes to the clothing that they wear are very different, as we'll come to find out. What they have to wear for ihram is different than what men have to wear. And so part of the process as a recommendation is to remove all of the fitted clothing. And the fitted clothing here we're talking about, he says makhit, we often think of that as sewn clothing, but it's more general than what is sewn, what is weaved fabric and sewn together. But what is perhaps a more accurate term in modern times is al-mufassal, which has been fashioned or tailored to fit you, like having a sleeve. Well, even if it's not cloth, it could be made out of leather, for example, and it's cut in a way that it fits the body. It goes over the head, for example, and it has certain, maybe it's not even sewn, but it could be stapled together. Or there's buttons or snaps that are holding it in place. Or it's cut in a way in which it fits the body. So we're talking about anything that has been fashioned to fit the body, unlike those large sheets or wraps that you just have to kind of wrap around your body. So here, you would remove all of this. So we're talking about the qamis, like the shirt or the thobe. We're talking about the sarawil, which are like your pants, your undergarments. All of that would come off. And this, of course, is based on the Prophet ﷺ having been reported to remove everything. So then, alayhi salatu wasalam, tajarrada li ihlalihi. He removed everything, all of these fitted clothing, in order to perform or enter ihram. And you can find this in Sunnah Tirmidhi. The other recommendation, Ibn Qaid, he says, وَسُنَّ لَهُ أَيْضًا أَنْ يُحْرِمَ that it's also a recommendation to enter into ihram fi izarin wa rida'in abyadaini nadhifain. As Imam al-Buhuti mentions here, wearing clean white upper and lower wraps. So again, that's the izar, that's the lower portion, and the rida', that's the upper portion that we're accustomed to seeing. Some of us have performed these rites, so we know very much what they are. So it's recommended that they be white and clean, which means that you could wear a different color if you were so inclined. You could wear almost any other color, with the exception of pure red. You could wear green or black or blue. That's not a recommendation. What's recommended is white, and also for them to be clean when putting them on. It's also recommended that you wear na'alain, which are sandals. And this is based on the Prophet ﷺ saying that you must make ihram in an upper garment, a lower garment, and sandals. لِيُحْرِمْ أَحَدُكُمْ بِإِزَارٍ وَرِدَاءٍ وَنَعْلَيْنِ. This is found in Musnad Imam Ahmad. And here when we talk about the sandals, the footwear, this is another important thing to consider. The footwear that you're going to be using during ihram is much like the sandals that we've become accustomed to today, like flip-flops are perfectly fine. Even if the flip-flops are made and they're sewn together, nothing wrong with that. You don't have to wear the plastic flip-flops or the little slides. One thing that you do want to consider is the nature of the footwear, in that you cannot wear like a boot, which covers the foot and has goes up above the ankle, or something similar to that. And you should also avoid footwear which covers the majority of the foot, much like the clogs people buy, like Crocs or Rugged Sharks, for example, or the Moroccan slippers, where it covers the majority of the foot, the front part of it especially, and the heel might be left out so you can slide in and out of that. That you should also avoid when selecting footwear for your ihram. So what you would wear are the typical sandals. They can have, the bottom of it, obviously, where you're going to be putting your foot on. It can be made out of whatever permissible material, and then that's held on with straps of some kind, whether they're straps in the front and there's a strap around the heel. All of those straps are permissible, so long as it's not so much that now it begins to cover the entirety or the majority of the foot. And then he says, وَإِحْرَامٌ عَقِبَ صَلَاةٍ. So this is another recommendation, that ihram is made after a prayer. And that prayer can be an obligatory prayer, or it can be a voluntary prayer. So if you were at the Miqat, for example, you would make ihram عَقِبَ صَلَاةٍ. So you would, either be there for an obligatory prayer, and then you would pray, and then you would make ihram, or you would get to the Miqat and you would pray a voluntary prayer, and then you would make ihram. Because this is found in Sunnah Nasa'i, the Prophet ﷺ would make ihram at the end of the prayer. At the end of, he says, dubara salatin, after a prayer was performed. It gives you an idea of some of the recommendations that you can do when preparing to make ihram. So ihram here, exactly what is it? He says, وَنِيَّتُهُ شَرْطٌ, that the intention is a condition. The intention of the ihram is a condition, meaning without the intention there is no, that the ihram is not valid. So you will not have entered into ihram by simply removing your clothing. That's not ihram, taking the clothing off, or making the talbiyah. That is not going to suffice you by making the talbiyah. A person can make the talbiyah and not intend to be performing Hajj or Umrah. They could just make it. It's perfectly fine for someone to do that. So making the talbiyah is not sufficient. There has to be an intention involved. And this, of course, is based on a very famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are according to their intentions. We understand the foundational nature of this hadith and how it applies to all of our acts of worship. It's also recommended, he says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ قَوْلُهُ اللهم إني أريد نسك كذا. It's recommended for you to say, oh Allah, I desire such and such ritual. It's recommended to specify the ritual. Recommended. You're going to specify the ritual and then to utter it. So this is where your intention matches what you're going to say. Right? So there's a combination of two things here. To specify the ritual and to utter that ritual specifically. And then you would say, فَيَسِّرْهُ لِي وَتَقَبَّلْهُ مِنِّي. This is a prayer you're asking, oh Allah, facilitate it for me, meaning make it easy for me and accept it from me. And then it's recommended that you state a condition that says, وَإِنْ حَبَسَنِي حَابِسٌ, that if I were to be prevented by something, meaning if something were to stop me from carrying out the rite or ritual that I've intended, like you fell ill, an illness which prevented you from moving forward, not like I got a little headache and I had a runny nose, or the types of like illnesses that are very, kind of mild, which we typically just carry on with our daily activity, but something that was serious enough that would prevent you from going forward, or an enemy stopped you, or you ran out of money and now you were no longer able to afford, or your money was stolen and now you can't carry on, or some type of prevention, something that got, or hindrance that got on your way, then with this condition here, he says, فَمَحِلِّي, then my place of disengagement, basically, this would be the place in which I'm going to exit Ihram, حَيْثُ حَبَسْتَنِي, will be wherever I have been stopped. So basically now we're giving us we're going to state a condition to our Ihram. And this is like, it's a recommendation and it's a safety measure all at the same time. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ said to one of the female companions, Luba'a bint al-Zubayr, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. She said to the Prophet ﷺ, I want to make Hajj, but I'm not feeling well, or I feel unwell. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Hujji واشترطي قولي اللهم محلي حيث حبستني. Basically he said, you should make Hajj, carry out your Hajj, and make a condition by saying, Allahumma محلي حيث حبستني, oh Allah, my place of disengagement will be wherever I have been stopped. And this hadith you find in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. There's another narration from An-Nasa'i, I should say, an addition to the narration, in a good chain of narration. He says, فَإِنَّ لَكِ عَلَى رَبِّكَ مَسْتَثْنَيْتِ. Basically, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept whatever condition you stipulate. Your Lord will accept any condition that you stipulate. And because of that, that intention, that condition for your intention, whenever you are prevented, wherever you are prevented, based on the things that we mentioned there, the basic examples of being ill or something like that, then you can come out of Ihram, you can disengage, and there'll be no consequence. There'll be no fidya or anything that you have to pay. You just simply come out of Ihram and you're done. It's like no harm, no foul. You can, pick up the following for the following rites and rituals, whether that's the following year or another time for Umrah, etc. This condition is permitted for legitimate reasons. It's not permitted for you to make a condition that I'm going to disengage whenever I feel like it. Like, I'm going to make Hajj, but if I just don't want to anymore. I'm going to come out of my ihram and khalas, that's going to be it. That's not the way the condition works, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَتِمُّ الْحَجَّ وَالْعُمْرَةَ لِلَّهِ. Complete your hajj and umrah for the sake of Allah. You don't start it and not complete it, simply by the desire. I don't want to do this anymore. It's hard. I'm tired. It's hot. I'm bored. You can't just come out in that way. So that type of condition would not work. Or to make a condition which states that if I do something which spoils my ihram or invalidates it, then that will be my disengagement. This is another condition which is considered invalid. And there are numerous things which could spoil your ihram or invalidate your hajj. And so you would have to live with those things and not simply just turn away from them by making this type of invalid condition. Ibn Qaid, he notes here about the ihram. A person's ihram, the state of being ihram, is not voided due to a loss of mental faculty, a loss of consciousness, or inebriation, meaning if they became intoxicated in some way, they would still be in a state of ihram. And this is much like death. So when a person passes away, if they were in ihram before they died, they remain in ihram. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ indicated when someone passed away in ihram, that they were to be, that their funeral rites were to be handled in a manner in which would not violate the sanctity of that ihram, meaning like covering your head, etc. So they would maintain their ihram. It's not the opposite, so that a person that had a loss of mental capacity or was unconscious or drunk, they could not enter into ihram being in that state. But if they were and they happened to fall into one of those conditions, then the ihram would maintain itself throughout. The next thing that we look at here is kind of indicated by Imam al-Bahuti. He says, وَأَفْضَلُ الْأَنْسَاكِ التَّمَتُّعِ, that the best ritual type is tamattu'. So there are three types or ritual types. You have tamattu', you have ifrad, and you have qiran. These are the three types of pilgrimages that a person could make. Right? So the best one, he says here, is at-tamattu'. And this is the most popular one because it's considered by the majority to be the best one. And then after tamattu, you have ifrad, that's the next best, and following that is qiran. Imam Ahmad noted, he says, لا أشك أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان قارنا. He says, I have no doubt that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم was qarin. He made hajj as a qarin, meaning he made the qiran form of hajj. وَالْمُتْعَةُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ. And he's talking about tamattu' is more preferred to me. He says, because it was the last thing that he commanded people to do. And you can find this in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ commanded the companions when they were making tawaf and sa'i to make that tawaf and sa'i umrah, unless they came with a hadi, with a sacrificial animal, and that was associated with their ihram. The sacrificial animal was associated with them making ihram. And then he said, kind of rather apologetically, he said, or had I known then what I know now, I would have not brought the animal and disengaged with you. So meaning the Prophet ﷺ would have performed tamattu', but he had the hadi, he had the sacrificial animal with him, and so he had to continue with the hajj type that he intended from the very beginning. So here, basically this narration in Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, you can see that the Prophet ﷺ is basically indicating the virtuous nature of tamattu and its preferred or its preference over the other two types. So what are those two types or those three types of hajj? Imam al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, basically a tamattu', he says, بأن يحرم بالعمرة في أشهر الحج ويفرغ منها ثم يحرم بالحج في عامه من مكة Basically, he goes on. So here he says that tamattu is to make ihram for umrah in the months of Hajj. In the months of Hajj are, who remembers? The months of Hajj are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and the Ashar, and Dhul Hijjah, right? The 10 days. So you have Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. Those are the 10 months. Those are the months of Hajj. So here, you would make ihram for umrah, even if it's on Shawwal 1, which is Eid. You could make ihram for umrah as a tamattu', mutamatti'. You're going to make a tamattu' Hajj, and then you can make your umrah, and then you could be ready to make Hajj when it's time to do so. During the same year, of course, you couldn't go make the umrah and then leave, and then come back the following year like, yeah, I did my umrah for tamattu', and now I'm going to make the Hajj for tamattu'. No, you have to be there then in the same year. And basically, he says here also that you have to be, you would do that from Mecca, meaning ثُمَّ يُحْرِمَ بِالْحَجِّ فِي عَامِهِ. You would make ihram for Hajj in that year, من مكة أو قربها أو بعيد منها. Basically, either you're in Mecca or you're close to it or even further away from it. So the idea here, tamattu', is you're going to make ihram. So you're going to make ihram for umrah. Then you're going to come out of ihram after umrah, and then you're going to make ihram again for Hajj. And then you're going to complete Hajj, and then you're going to come out of ihram for that. The next type, known as ifrad, ifrad meaning singular, is to make ihram for Hajj. He says, Ibn Qa'id, and yuhrima bihajjin. So you're going to make ihram for Hajj. ثُمَّ بِأُمْرَةٍ بَعْدَ فَرَاغِهِ مِنْهُ. Then you would make umrah or ihram for umrah after you've completed Hajj. And that is talking about someone that hasn't made Umratul Islam. Right? They haven't fulfilled the obligation of Umrah. So they would complete their Hajj, and then if they had to fulfill this obligation of Umrah, they could then make Umrah after their Hajj. They would make Ihram for Umrah after they've completed Hajj. So essentially here, Ifrad means you're just going to make Hajj. And then Al-Qiran, which is the third one, and yuhrima bihima ma'an, that you're going to make ihram for both of them at the same time together. Make ihram for both Hajj and for Umrah, or when you intend Hajj, he says, أو biha, you're going to make ihram for Umrah, ثم يدخله, meaning you're going to then intend to make Hajj along with it, عليها قبل شروع في طوافها, before you begin to make tawaf. Understand the nature of these three different types. Qiran, meaning that you're going to make ihram for both Hajj and Umrah, or you're going to make ihram for Umrah and then you're going to make the intention for Hajj before you make tawaf. He says, وَمَنْ أَحْرَمَ بِهِ ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَهَا عَلَيْهِ لَمْ يَصِحَّ إِحْرَامُهُ بِهَا. وَمَنْ أَحْرَمَ بِهِ, whoever makes intention for Hajj, ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَهَا, and then makes the intention for Umrah along with the Hajj, لَمْ يَصِحَّ إِحْرَامُهُ بِهَا, then the Ihram for Umrah doesn't count. So basically, you have to make it in that order. First the intention or the Ihram for Umrah, and then you can intend to make Hajj before you make Tawaf. If you make the intention for Hajj first, and then you make the intention for Umrah, the Ihram for Umrah won't count in that case. It will just be for Hajj. So those are the three different, types. Each of them have some, obviously, virtue. The best of them, tamattu', and then the others, there may be some reason why you want to perform those. There may be some benefit to each of those that would suit your particular situation. And so you have options here when you're going to make it, when you're going to make Hajj and you're going to make Umrah, what it is that you can do. Okay, so associated with the tamattu', he says, Imam Bahuti, وَعَلَيْهِ dam. So this is وَيَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ, meaning it's an obligation that for the mutamatti', the person making tamattu', has dam, which means a blood sacrifice, which is associated with the ritual. He says, لَا دَمَ جُبْرَانِ, not a sacrifice associated with some type of penalty. Right? So we can understand that there are two types of blood sacrifices. There's dam shukran, which is a sacrifice given out of gratitude to Allah, and that's basically for facilitating the journey, for facilitating the rites and rituals that you were able to do it, so you slaughter as a way of showing gratitude. And then there's dam jubran, which means it's an obligation due to some type of penalty that has been incurred. And this is due for one who comes from the horizons, as it's been translated in kana ufuqiyan. La dama jubran in kana ufuqiyan, meaning that in order for this to be an obligation, you would have had to come from the horizons. And what that means is from a distance long enough away to permit you to shorten your prayers. That means you're out that distance. So again, now this is like kind of a third boundary here. If you're going from the haram, and then you go out to the distance of, which permits you to shorten and combine your prayers. If you've come from outside of that border, then alayka dam. You have to have a sacrificial animal that you're going to slaughter during the rites and rituals. If you come from the haram, that's where you are. You're min ahl al-haram. Or you're from within that border, the distance of which permits you shortening your prayers, فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ. They have no blood sacrifice that has to be made. And this is based on the verse in the Quran, ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَهْلُهُ حَاضِرِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. You find this in Surah Al-Baqarah. These offerings are for those who do not live near the sacred house. This is verse number 196. So when it comes to the blood sacrifice, you should note that the qarin is similar to al-mutamatti' in regards to the obligation of this blood sacrifice. The qarin also has to have an animal. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was qarin, because he said, I brought along with me this animal. I have it with me. And so he had to remain in that particular, in that kind of category of ihram or of hajj. Another condition for the blood sacrifice of tamattu' is that the ihram be made from the miqat, or a distance from Mecca greater than that which permits shortening prayer, and to not travel between the two, meaning between your umrah and your hajj. If you were to travel the distance which permits shortening prayer or beyond, they are to make ihram and there would be no blood sacrifice. Basically what that means is they would no longer be considered mutamatti' because they've gone outside of the border as described. The next issue is a woman who may experience her menstrual cycle while performing the rituals. He says, وَإِنْ حَاضَتْ مُتَمَتِّعَةٌ وَخَافَتْ فَوْتَ الْحَجِّ أَحْرَمَتْ بِهِ وَصَارَتْ قَارِنَةً. So here you can see how the different types may have a positive impact or have some type of benefit for a woman who is going to begin a menstrual cycle. He says here, وَإِنْ حَاضَتْ امْرَأَةٌ مُتَمَتِّعَةٌ قَبْلَ طَوَافِ الْعُمْرَةِ. If she were to begin her menstrual cycle, a woman who's making tamattu' before she begins tawaf al-umrah, وَخَافَتْ فَوْتَ الْحَجِّ. And now she's worried that she's going to miss Hajj, meaning that maybe there's only a couple of days left before it's time to make Hajj. Hajj isn't like open, you just make it whenever you want. As you know, it has a start date and an end date. And it may be that the woman has arrived just before that start date, enough time for her to make Umrah, and then the next day perhaps, which is typical, or the day after they're going to begin the Hajj rites. As she gets there, getting ready, she's already made her intentions, Ihram, etc., all that, and then she begins her menstrual cycle. She hasn't made her tawaf for Umrah yet. What's she going to do? She fears like, look, I can't wait it out. I don't have enough time for my menstrual cycle to conclude so that I can then make tawaf. So, in this case, she would أحرمت به وجوبا وصارت قارنة. She's going to make ihram. This would be obligatory for her to do this in order to become qarina, which means now she's going to do both. Ahramat bihi, meaning she's going to make ihram for Hajj. Remember, tamattu means you make ihram for Umrah, and then after your Umrah you make ihram for Hajj. They are two separate things. Whereas the Qarin is the one that makes ihram for Umrah, and then, or Hajj together, or makes ihram for Umrah, and then later, before Tawaf, makes ihram for Hajj. So in this case, what she's going to do is, she makes the intention for ihram for Umrah, she gets there, she's going to make tamattu, menstrual cycle starts, now she's obliged to make ihram for Hajj, so that she can become a qarina. This is based on a report in Sahih Muslim. Aisha radiallahu anha, she was mutamatti'ah, and then her menstrual cycle started. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, ahilli bil hajj, meaning make ihram for Hajj. Right? You came for Umrah, but now you're going to make ihram for Hajj, you're going to become a qarina. So this is an option for her. So now that she can make Hajj, and then she can make Umrah again as well. Another thing that Ibn Qayyim notes here, he says that when we've talked about I mentioned before that it's recommended to specify the rite, the type of Hajj. But if a person were to make Ihram and just leave it open, like an open-ended ritual of Hajj, then it would be valid. And the intention would then basically fall on what they decided to do. I'm going to make Hajj. Right? That's the intention. I'm going to make Hajj. It's open. They didn't specify. That's a recommendation, not an obligation. And then when they're getting ready to get started, they say, you know what? I'm going to do this, that, or the other. Then that would be the case for them. He also says that it's permissible or it's valid for someone to say, I'm going to make Ihram like this person has made. It would count so long as they knew what that person was going to do. If they knew they were going to be a qarin or mutamatti, or they're going to be a mufrid, then they would, their intention would suffice. It would be valid for them. If they didn't know what Hajj type they were going to make that person, then it would fall to the Umrah, because that's something that they would be certain of, the intention to make Umrah. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. Another narration mentioned by Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَسُنَّ عَقِبَ إِحْرَامِهِ تَلْبِيَةٌ. After making Ihram, it's recommended to make the talbiyah. وَهِيَ لَبَيْكَ اللَّهُمَّ لَبَيْكَ. So this is the talbiyah that we've all come to know, which is to say, I am here at your service, O Allah. لَبَيْكَ اللَّهُمَّ لَبَيْكَ. Or لَبَيْكَ اللَّهُمَّ لَبَيْكَ means أَنَا مُقِيمٌ عَلَى طَاعَتِكَ وَإِجَابَةِ أَمْرِكَ. I am in the service of you, in obedience to you, answering your command, fulfilling your command. لَبَيْكَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَكَ لَبَيْكَ. Here it says, you have no partner. Surely all praise and blessings belong to you, which is إِنَّ الْحَمْدَ وَالنِّعْمَةَ لَكَ وَالْمُلْكَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَكَ. Surely all praise and blessings are yours, and the dominion. You have no partner. Now this was narrated by Ibn Umar from the Prophet ﷺ. There's a hadith which is muttafaqun alayh. You can find this in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the nature of this talbiyah. He says, وَيَجْهَرُ بِهَا الرَّجُلُ. That it is recommended, the talbiyah is recommended to be made aloud by men. And there is a narration for this. It's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, in which it says, Atani Jibreel. Jibreel came to me, فَأَمَرَنِي أَنْ أَمَرَ أَصْحَابِي أَنْ يَرْفَعُوا أَصْوَاتَهُمْ بِالْإِهْلَالِ وَالتَّلْبِيَّةِ. He says that Jibreel came to me and ordered me to command my companions to raise their voices with the ihram and the talbiyah. And Imam at-Tirmidhi authenticated this particular hadith. So it's recommended to be loud for men, وَتَسِرُّهَا الْمَرْأَةِ, and for it to be soft, meaning the volume to be low, تُخْفِيهَا, right, to make it low, the woman. So the woman's not going to raise her voice. And we understand that the voice of the woman, according to the madhab, is not awrah, It's not an awra, meaning that you couldn't hear. It's impermissible if you were to hear the voice of a strange woman. However, she would lower her voice to the degree that her female traveling companion could hear her, and not beyond that. It is considered disliked for her to raise her voice above that volume, مخافة الفتنة, which basically is, in order to avoid stirring up desires in the men that are perhaps around or in her company. All right, so consideration has to be given for everybody involved in these types of like communal functions. It's also recommended that you mention the type of nusuk that you're making in the talbiyah. So if you could say the talbiyah and then you said tamattu or qarin or whatever it may be, or labayk Allahumma bi umrah, and also to make the talbiyah like in abundance, to make it regularly or a lot during your journey. He says here, وَتَتَأَكَّدُ إِذَا عَلَى نَشَزًا, meaning that if you were to go up on a high place, this is when it's emphasized to make the talbiyah, أَوْ هَبَطَ وَادِيًا, or if you were to descend down into a ravine or a valley, أَوْ الْتَقَتِ الرِّفَاقِ, if you were to meet with companions, أَوْ أَقْبَلَ لَيْلٌ أَوْ نَهَارٌ, if the night were to begin or the day were to begin. These are all times in which it's encouraged, it's stressed for you to make the talbiyah. أَوْ سَمِعَ مُلَبِّيًا, or if you heard somebody else making the talbiyah. أَوْ صَلَّى فَرِيضَةً, or if you were to pray an obligatory prayer, then you would make the talbiyah afterwards. أَوْ رَأَى الْبَيْتِ, or when you see the house, meaning you see the Kaaba, then it's emphasized for you to make the talbiyah. He says, أَوْ رَكِبَ أَوْ نَزَلَ, if you mounted or boarded, for example, got in the car, or got on the bus, or got on the plane, or hopped on the horse, or whatever you were riding, or if you got off of that, or dismounted, or whatever, then it's also a time in which it's encouraged to make the talbiyah. Or إِذَا فَعَلَ مَحْظُورًا نَاسِيًا, if you did something which is impermissible forgetfully, then this is a time in which you're encouraged or emphasized for you to make the talbiyah. It is recommended, I should say, it is legislated to be made in Arabic language for those that are capable of doing it in Arabic language. وَإِلَّا فَبِلُغَتِهِ, Ibn Qaid says, if they're unable to say it in Arabic, then they are permitted to say it in their own language. Right? There are Muslims all over the globe, and some of them are not familiar with Arabic. Some of them are new, have yet to learn enough in order to make the talbiyah in the Arabic language, and so they're permitted to do so. If they are capable of saying the talbiyah or learning it in time in Arabic, then they would say it in Arabic and not in a different language. So يُسَنُّ بَعْدَهَا دُعَاءٌ, it's recommended after it to make dua, وَصَلَاتٌ عَلَى النَّبِي, to send salutations upon the Prophet ﷺ. لَا تِكْرَارُهَا فِي حَالَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ, not that you make the talbiyah constantly without stopping. Right? The talbiyah is made, some, and then you stop, and then you say it, and you repeat it, and then you stop, etc. And it can be, he says, وَلَا تُكْرَهُ لِحَلَالٍ, and it's also not disliked for someone who is halal, meaning they're not muhrim. Someone, I mentioned that before, to make the talbiyah. It's not disliked. So any of us today sitting here, we can make the talbiyah. لَبَيْكَ اللَّهُمَّ لَبَيْكَ لَبَيْكَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَكَ لَبَيْكَ إِنَّ الْحَمْدَ وَالنِّعْمَةَ لَكَ وَالْمُلْكَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. No problem. This is not disliked. And by saying it, it doesn't mean now all of a sudden we're in ihram and we're stuck, right? No, that's not the case. So it's not disliked for someone to say it that's not making ihram or making the rites and rituals. So that gives you a general idea of the different types of Hajj. The next section, which has to do with ihram, while you're in ihram, what are the things that you can and cannot do? So Imam al-Buhuti says, يَحْرُمُ بِإِحْرَامٍ حَلْقُ شَعْرٍ وَتَقْلِيمُ ظُفْرٍ بِلَا عُذْرٍ. He says it is, while you're in ihram, it is impermissible to shave the hair. وَتَقْلِيمُ ظُفْرٍ, to clip or to trim the nails, both your hand, your fingernails, or your toenails. And when it comes to hair, that's talking about all of body hair. whatever body hair. And here, halqu sha'rin, what's meant here is not just shaving it, but it is izalatu, like to remove it. Whether you're doing it by a razor, shaving it off, or by plucking it out, or by cutting it, ripping it, any form or fashion which removes hair from the body is impermissible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, لا تحلقوا رؤوسكم حتى يبلغ الهدي محله. He says here, do not shave your heads until the sacrificial animal has reached its destination. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 197. So here you can find the evidence for that in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the Quran. The next thing was taqlim al-dhufr, al-dhufr, which is the fingernail, either to take it off or to trim it from the hand or from the foot without an excuse, without a need to do so. If a hair or a nail were to come off on its own, like if a hair were to come out or a nail were to be broken, and that was it was removed, فَأَزَالُهُمَا أَوْ زَالَ مَعَ غَيْرِهِمَا, and removing it, because of that, something else came off with it as well. He says, فَلَا فِدْيَةٍ, there is no penalty for doing so. Another thing, like he mentions here, Ibn Qadi says, when حصل الأذى بقرح أو قمل, like if you have some type of harm that afflicts you, like a wound, or you have like head lice or something, فَأَزَالَ شَعْرُهُ لِذَلِكَ, then you have to remove your hair for that, فَدَى, you're going to have a penalty that you're going to pay. So there's something that you have to understand here with the penalties of these things. Because it's haram, it's sinful to do it. And then there's a penalty associated with it. So in the event that you have an excuse, as we're looking at here, the sin is removed due to an udhr, like a legitimate excuse, you can do that. Like if you have to shave your head because of like you got head lice and it's just driving you nuts. Or there's something that's happened, it's having a detrimental impact on you, and you can take care of that. In Islam, that's how things work, you know. Harm, hardship, they change the rulings to things. Okay, when there's like the necessity knows no law is one of the foundational principles, right? Necessity knows no law. Like it's al-dururat tubiha al-mahdhurat, or al-hajat tubiha al-makruhat, right? Needs, they permit things which are disliked. And so here, if you have an excuse, it means that it's not sinful for you to do it. However, if you do it, he says here, fada, you have to perform, or you have to pay this penalty. So what are the penalties? فَمَنْ حَلَقَ شَعْرَةً أَوْ بَعْضَهَا, if you were to remove an entire hair, a single hair, or a part of a single hair, أَوْ قَلَّمَ ظُفْرًا أَوْ بَعْضَهَا, if you were to trim a nail or part of the nail, فَعَلَيْهِ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ, then you would have to feed a poor person. وَشَعْرَتَيْنِ أَوْ بَعْضَهُمَا, if it were two hairs, he says here, or a portion of two hairs, or ظُفْرَيْنِ أَوْ بَعْضَهُمَا, or if it was two nails or a portion of two nails, فَطَعَامَ مِسْكِينٍ, then there would be two like feedings for the poor. So basically one per thing that was cut or removed. And then after that, he says, وَثَلَاث شَعَرَاتٍ, if it's three hairs or a portion of three hairs, or three nails or a portion of three nails, or anything above that number, 4, 5, 6, 7, and onward, فَعَلَيْهِ دَمْ, then at that point there's a blood sacrifice. So you can get an idea of the serious nature of these offenses when you are in ihram. The next thing, so just to keep track here, it's noted here, Ibn Qadi says there are 9 things that you have to be wary of. 9 infractions that you would commit. The first one we said, hair, removal of hair, trimming of nails. Number 3, he says, تَغْطِيتُ الرَّأْسِ, that is to cover your head, and this is applicable to men. So when a man were to cover his head, whether that's something that like sits on his head, it's fixed on his head, you know, whether it's what's typical, like you're wearing a hat, you're wearing a turban, or if you're to put something atypical on your head, like mud, you kick mud on your head, or maybe you put some type of bandage on your head or some type of material on your head. That would be a covering. Or he says, بِتَضْلِيل مَحْمِلٍ, which is to basically go inside of a mahmil, which is like a hoda. The hoda is what they would put on top of the animals. Typically, this was for women to ride in. They would go inside. It's like a pod. It's a pod that's kind of built for that person. So the nature of the pod is that they're in there, and it's as if that a roof of the pod is right. They're so close to it, it's as if it's on their head. That's the nature of the size of that pod. There's also a mariya, which was known to be put on the camels, and there was two sides. Two men would sit in that, similar to the hoda or the mahmil. They call that hodij. So the Ammariya was one where two men would ride into it. It would be kind of similar to the first thing, in which the top of it was extremely low. They were like little pods that were sitting in there. It may come in contact with their head, and even if it were not, it's as if it was something similar to that, which would mean it was impermissible, bila udhrin wa fada. Haruma bila udhrin wa fada. So in this case, it's impermissible without the excuse, or without the permission due to an excuse, and there would be a penalty that would be paid. This is not the case for a person who may go inside of a tent to seek shade, or go under a tree, to go inside of a building to seek shade, even though there's something over their head. The scholars of latter time, like now, they talk about cars and buses. It's fine to have the roofs on those things because they're similar to like the tents and the trees, etc. That's number 3. Number 4, he says, is lubsu makhitin. We talked a little bit about that already. And this is fitted clothing for men to wear that bila haja. So you may have a need. Again, there may be an excuse, like the weather. It may be cold, and you're in Ihram. And you know, the Ihram is those two garments. It's not going to always work out for you if the temperatures drop. Even in the desert, the temperatures, even though we often associate very high heats, it gets very hot. There are times in which it can get quite cold. And so in the case that there's a need to put something on, lubsul mukhit, for this reason, it would be permissible, wayafdi. You're going to have to still, he says here, lubsul mukhitin bila hajatin wayafdi. You would still have to have a penalty for that case. An important point here to note about Ibn Qad mentions this, and I think it's important because we might see some of this on a regular occasion when it comes to wearing the rida and the izar, when you're going to put that on. So because we're not supposed to be wearing fitted clothing, you don't want to turn those garments into a fitted-like situation, in which you would tie the rida onto you. Or something else, you would tie it onto you in a way that now it becomes almost fitted. You could tie your izar, which is the lower part, okay? Or you could wear like a belt for your izar. You could wear a money belt as well. Those are typical today. And you could... there's a need for that, obviously. You would need to perhaps tie the izar in order to keep it from exposing the awrah. You may need to wear a belt or tie a belt like a rope around. You may need to do that so that the izar stays up. You may need to have a money belt if you're carrying money with you, so that you don't lose the money that you're maybe required to have in order to spend on your journey. So all of that is permitted due to the need. However, you want to avoid certain things like buttons, snaps, using pins, those types of things. so that you don't start making it into a fitted clothing. If you were to do that, then this could be sinful, and there would be a penalty for doing such. If you wanted to, for example, tighten your waist, what you have on, tighten the waist part of that, without having to tie or deal with these fasteners, you could wrap it in a way in which it kind of locks in on itself. If you've ever worn the izar, or you're wearing a lungi or whatever, you know that there's ways in which you can wrap it. You don't have to tie it, and it kind of tightens around the waist. Another thing that you would want to avoid is taking the top of the ridat, right, which is the top part. You're wearing the izar on the bottom, and it's kind of tightened to your waist. And then you start stuffing the edges of the ridat inside of the izar, such that now you're creating like almost a fitted top. Now you've got some pieces jammed in there, so now it looks kind of like a vest or a shawl or something that is now fixed and fitted to the body. So those are things that you want to stay away from when you're putting that on. Number 5, he says, تَطَيِّبٌ فِي بَدَنٍ أَوْ ثَوْبٍ. So basically, we're talking about putting perfumes on the body or the clothing. This is while you're in ihram. Remember, we said you could do that before ihram, but not after. فَإِنْ فَعَلَ, meaning as a muhrim, you put on that perfume, أَوْ الدَّهَنَ, or you put on that oil or the fragrance, whether you put on kuhl for fragrance purposes, because the kuhl, some of it is perfumed. بِمُطَيِّبٍ, he says here, that's been perfumed. أو شم قصدا طيبا أو استعمله في أكل ونحوه, whether you've used the perfume, you've intentionally sniffed it to smell it, or you've used it in your food or in your drink, those types of things, to bring out some type of flavor or to have some type of odor. Ibn Qadi says, لا للونه فقط, not just to color the food, but there's some specific thing that happens here. أو تبخر بعود ونحوه, or like you've made bukhur, or those types of things. أثم وفدا, you'd be sinful, and there'd be a penalty that you'd have to pay. This is min at-tib. He says, وَمِنَ الطِّيب misk. Now he's going to categorize these things. This is what I was hinting at earlier. Tib, it's not like all fragrances, but it's what is considered tib, like misk. He says kafur, ambar or za'faran. He says wars. He's also yasmin, or those types of things. Ward, there's rose water. If a person were to apply those things in this way or use them in that manner, then this would be tib. If they were to happen to walk by a place like a shop that's selling all this, and they just smelt that stuff because it was like an unintentional, sniffing of it or breathing it in without intention, there would be no harm, no foul. Or if they were to touch something that would not stick to them, then that would not count as well. Or if they were to smell like fruit or wood. So these aren't considered tib. Like if you were to smell like, if you liked lemon fragrances or oranges or apples or grapes or other things that had odors, smelling that fragrance or something that produced those odors, like a lemon freshener, right? Those types of things. It's not the same because this isn't considered tib. And that brings you to the point of like soaps and stuff. Like when you're going to be in ihram, you might be in ihram for it could be days that you're in ihram. And you may want to freshen up, like you wash yourself up, nothing wrong with using water, etc. And there are soaps that are not fragrant soaps. They make them available everywhere that don't have scent in them. Those are the safest bet to go with. However, if it was like a lemon fragranted soap, this is min al-fawakih. It's fruit. It's not tib. It's not like misk soap, which they make, right? In the Muslim world, you'll find those types of fragrances that are there, or rose water fragrance, etc. So that's something to keep in mind. Number 6, he says, قَتْلُ السَّيْدِ الْبَرِّ, which is, we're talking about killing land, game, animals, hunting them. وقد أشار إليه بقوله ويحرم أيضا قتل صيد بري مأكول ومتولد منه ومن غيره واصطياده وأذاه ومن أتلفه أو تلف بيده أو عان عليه فعليه جزاؤه. So here it's also impermissible to kill an edible land game animal, what it births of his own kind or another. There's like some type of crossbreeding that was happening. It's impermissible to hunt or to harm it. And whoever kills one of these land game animals, they kill it directly or indirectly. So you were involved in the process somehow, or assist in it. So like you said, hey, like there's the animal. Like you alerted somebody to the animal that would be killed. You said, even though it's just like you've now assisted in the process. So you can either assist in it, you can do it yourself. In that case, you could help somebody do it. If you've committed that, then alayhi jaza'u. Then you would have to take care of the penalty for that. And there's a penalty for various different types of animals. And I think we're going to look at that in some detail later on, inshallah ta'ala. And this is where we're going to stop for this evening. There's not enough time to continue here. So again, everybody, thank you for your attendance that are here, listening online, for your attentive listening. Jazakallah khair. We'll pick up here inshallah next time. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhir da'wana. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.